I've been doing fighting games a lot recently. I mean, I barely even noticed, but all of a sudden I've done Pit Fighter, Mortal Kombat, and Rise of the Robots. It's not like I'm even a massive fighting game player or anything, but hey ho. I guess I can bring this to a bit of a close by looking at the godkin of fighting games itself. The glorious series that made fighting games the big thing of the early 90s, one of the most revolutionary games of them all. Well, sort of. Street Fighter 2 is pretty damn good, and most of you probably know that already. I want to do something else. Something that's a bit more my style. Now, I've only ever done one other video on video game movies, and that was when I did the 2 Tomb Raider movies way back when, 2 years ago now. And that was fun. So why not do another? Why not do my favourite video game movie? I mean, it's hardly good, like, at all, but it's absolutely a subject worth covering. So, let's go. Today's video is all about Street Fighter, the movie. Now, of course, we can't just do that typical movie review where I regurgitate plot points while adding various funny skits. I know that's generally how this sort of thing's done, but alas, my M. Bison costume is currently in the wash. However, what I can do is go into the history and the brains behind the Street Fighter movie, which is kind of worth doing as it was one of the movies that made video game movies a thing for a while. There wasn't all that much before it. The 80s hadn't produced much aside from movies inspired by video games, whether they were the cult classic war games or glorified Nintendo marketing fluff piece The Wizard. The movie based on Super Mario Bros. Does predate Street Fighter by a full year, but, well yeah, it was a humongous flop, not even making back half of its budget. To make something a thing, you kinda have to be at least a little successful, you know. And whatever your opinion of the movie might be aside, and however strained and calamitous the production was, Street Fighter was sort of a success. It made close to $100 million off a $35 million budget, which is a very respectable number indeed, particularly in the often hefty Christmas period. The film went up against Dumb and Dumber and The Santa Claus at the box office, and while it didn't beat them, it still made money. It probably didn't make quite as much money as everyone intended, but it wasn't really a flop, so it'd be one to treat it as such. This is my dream, basically. Covering this gives me so many angles to look at. So let's start with the genesis of the whole thing. The Street Fighter movie was, of course, something Capcom desired. Apparently the first rumblings occurred in the middle of 1993, and after catching wind of this, Edward Pressman, a veteran Hollywood producer, pitched to Capcom and got the job, with Capcom providing the most basic guidelines for victory. The film must be in the cinema by Christmas 1994, and that every single character from the game must be included. Can't miss out on anyone's favourite now, can we? The die was cast, and 'twas now Pressman's job to assemble a crack elite team to make the movie, starting with the director. Now, anyone who's even remotely familiar with 1980s action knows the name of Stephen E. D'Souza. He's an icon. This is the guy who wrote Commando, Die Hards 1 and 2, 48 Hours, The Running Man, amongst many others, making him one of the most successful screenwriters of the entire decade. Unfortunately, he hadn't directed any of those films, and was thus far unproven behind a camera, but Pressman knew him and trusted him professionally. He wanted to give him a shot. Capcom weren't wholly convinced, but they'd let D'Souza pitch to them as long as he could do it quickly. You know the scene in RoboCop when Morton gets the drop on Dick Jones in order to pitch RoboCop, and the old man says that he'll expect a full presentation in like 15 minutes? Basically that. No matter, as D'Souza's vast experience meant he came up with an idea and general structure pretty damn fast, and he got the directing gig. D'Souza had 2 golden rules for the movie. 1. It must absolutely not be a tournament movie. This is often one of the major problems people, especially fans of the game, have with this movie in fact. Why isn't it faithful to the original game? Why isn't it a tournament? To make up this whole plot thing is sacrilege. But no, I see where D'Souza was coming from. To look at it from another angle, martial arts tournament films had been a thing since the mid-80s, and hadn't ever been as successful as they had been in the glory days of Bloodsport and The Karate Kid, and there had been a lot of attempts. The genre had grown quite unfashionable by 1994, and it certainly wasn't due a comeback, at least not yet. Street Fighter as a tournament movie, I mean, it would have pleased the big fans, but probably little else besides that, and mass appeal was important. This is a Christmas blockbuster movie after all. Capcom agreed with D'Souza on this without question, meaning that there was never any chance that the film was going to be a tournament movie. And 2, the film must not feature every single character from the game. As a screenwriter, D'Souza immediately balked at this notion. Think about it, there are 16 playable characters in SSF2 alone, and Capcom wanted all of them. So we're fleshing out 16 characters through what should be a 90-minute blockbuster action movie. 90 divided by 16 equals roughly 5.5 minutes of screen time minimum for every character if you want a sort of balanced movie, obviously not including scenes that aren't character development or even any ancillary characters that could be included, like say Guile's missing friend Charlie or Shen Lon or any other character that would need to be created for this movie, so obviously 5.5 minutes wasn't going to work. D'Souza used the 7 Dwarfs example and asked if the Capcom execs could name all of the 7 Dwarfs. They couldn't, and the point stuck. D'Souza proposed centering the movie around 7 characters instead, and eventually Capcom agreed. Well, they did at this moment anyway. Now let's not get any delusions of grandeur here. All of this is bread and butter Hollywood production, pretty much. By this stage we're probably in the autumn of 1993, and Capcom want this movie in cinemas by Christmas of '94. That's a year and a bit to write, budget, scout, cast, shoot, edit, and make the sandwiches for a feature-length movie, which is basically no time at all. D'Souza could handle the script himself, but for everything else? Well, it wouldn't be a Hollywood production without executive meddling, wouldn't it? Capcom went back on what they'd agreed with D'Souza almost immediately, demanding changes constantly, and D'Souza had one bargaining chip that he could always depend on. That is, adding another character. Capcom wants Ryu to be played by an actor they like but who doesn't speak much English? Fine. We'll add an entirely new character to the film so that he can be in it, and Ryu can be the actor who D'Souza wanted to cast in the first place, Byron Mann. We're shooting a lot of the movie on the Gold Coast, so the Australian Actors Guild is demanding that we cast an Australian actor? Okay, we'll add Cammy to the cast, and she can be played by pop star extraordinaire but one-time popular soap actor Kylie Minogue. A couple of months was spent on casting alone, usually because Capcom always wanted one more role to be added and filled, to the point where in the end virtually everyone made it in anyway. The only playable character from the games that didn't make it into the movie was poor old Fei Lon, and only then because his role was taken by the all-new role of Captain Sawada, which was played by the guy Capcom had wanted to play Ryu, Kenya Sawada, a Japanese actor who had played a Ryu-esque role in TV commercials and whose voice was the only one dubbed over in post. Why not just call him Fei Lon? Partly because including a character whose background is as a Hong Kong movie star was too much of a stretch, but mainly because of the worry that Fei Lon's similarity to Bruce Lee would cause legal trouble. All of this purely affected the supporting cast. The 2 main names were attached pretty much from the beginning. The all-American Guile was going to be the main protagonist, and he would be played by the all-Belgian muscles from Brussels, Jean-Claude Van Damme. You might think this to be an odd choice, certainly in the acting skills department, but he had the martial arts action experience and skills, and the box office clout. JCVD was big in 1994, just coming off of Universal Soldier and Hard Target, and a couple of months before the release of Street Fighter, he would have his career highest grossing film, Time Cop. He also had a rather nasty cocaine habit and a whole load of baggage in the gossip sheets, but never mind, he was always going to be Guile. Capcom wanted him flat out. The other main name was Raul Julia, who needs almost no introduction. He was already a legend, a Shakespearean actor of almost effortless talent, known and loved by generations of people, whether it was for Gomez in The Addams Family or Proteus in The Two Gentlemen of Verona, and almost saintly in Latin America for his exploits. Any blockbuster film needs a bit of acting gravitas, particularly for its main antagonist, and Julia was penciled in to play M. Bison from the off. Initially reluctant to take the role on, Raul Julia took it after his kids persuaded him to do it. Near enough everyone else in the cast, a ragtag bunch of martial arts pros and character actors, were pretty damn excited to be playing alongside Raul. Damian Chapa, initially not too sure about playing Ken, took it on purely because Raul Julia was involved. Raul Julia was also sick following a near-fatal dose of food poisoning early in 1994, and stomach surgery from a few months previously that was rumoured to have been because of stomach cancer. But not wishing to alarm anyone, Raul kept his ill health largely to himself. In the end, the cast was set. And so, let's start looking at the movie proper. We can take the behind the scenes stuff in as we go. The movie starts at a very fast pace and pretty much doesn't stop until the finish. The plot, such as it is basically introduced in the first minute. General M. Bison, chief warlord of the fictional Asian country of Shadaloo, a place that... what is it, Ken?
Place makes Detroit look like Disneyland.
Thank you. Has captured a whole bunch of hostages and is demanding $20 billion as ransom, and it's up to Colonel William F. Guile and the AN, Allied Nations, to stop them. And yeah, that's basically it for the main plot. The Street Fighter characters are split into 3 groups. The good guys are, for the AN, Guile, Cammy, T-Hawk and Sawada. The good also includes a team of global news journalists, reporter Chun-Li Zhan, cameraman and boxer Balrog, and vision mixer stroke sumo wrestler E. Honda. On Team Bison we have his second in command, DJ, and good old Zangief, plus the head of the Shadaloo Ton, Sagat, and his best fighter, Vega. Then there's the neutrals. Ryu and Ken have come to Shadaloo as a pair of rather shady smugglers looking to make money by whipping off those with less morals than they have, and Dr. Dalsim is a scientist who has been captured by Bison to work on his creations and mutations. In this case, Carlos Charlie Blanca, an AN soldier who was captured with the rest of the hostages but taken for this purpose by Bison after Guile inadvertently revealed his friendship with Charlie. So yeah, a lot of characters, with one of the main themes of the movie being that they usually don't realise that they're on the same side. Both Chun-Li and Guile are driven by personal vendettas against Bison, but both have different ways of trying to get to him and just end up confusing and hurting each other.
This war is not about your personal vendetta. It's about mine.
Particularly when Guile literally fakes his own death to lull Bison into a false sense of security. He does this with the help of Ryu and Ken, who get captured in a raid on Sagat's Ton premises, and then made undercover agents for the AN. Ryu and Ken's role is kind of odd in that they're very much fishers out of water, neither good nor bad for a lot of the movie. Most fans of the game would probably be particularly unhappy with their portrayal in the movie, especially considering that Ryu is often considered to be the main protagonist of Street Fighter as a whole. Even though Guile is close behind, if there's anyone who the story of Street Fighter follows, it's Ryu. And he in particular is totally different when compared to who he is in the regular old games.
How you doing?
Hey, you're looking great.
Nice gun.
Hey, great uniform.
Long live Bison.
Yep, Bison.
In terms of the movie though, they're often interesting and they move the plot along, and they do function well as comic relief from time to time, even though the constant switches they make in Alliance only serve to increase the turmoil on the good side. The trouble with them is that they have a lot to do with the plot at the start, but as the movie hits its final third, they basically have bugger all to do. Which again is kind of weird for the guys who are basically Street Fighter's main characters. In fact, this is an issue that runs throughout the movie. A fair few of these characters get almost totally lost, particularly the Super Street Fighter characters. Cammy fares quite badly. I mean, considering how famous Kylie Minogue is here in the UK, and indeed the world, it is odd to see her with barely anything to do except say, "Yes, Colonel," and shout, "Thrust kick," for no reason. And as for T-Hawk, geez, he does even less. His 5 seconds of development time come near the end when Guile asks him why he's wearing a bandana. In a long shot where you can barely see it because chances are, like quite a bit of dialogue in the movie, it was dubbed in post. More on that later. DJ only fares slightly better as the guy who's only with Bison for the money, but that's mostly near the end when chaos just reigns everywhere. The core 12 do a lot better, but even then there's not a whole lot for, say, Vega or Balrog. And then there's the case of Dalsim and Blanca. As the two most fantastical SF characters, the stretchy-limbed yoga expert and the green-skinned monster, they're tricky, particularly as Street Fighter does try to keep itself a little grounded in reality, more so than other video game movies. With Blanca they don't do terribly, but it necessitates Charlie's transformation into their character through the whole movie via montages of violence and enough mutagens and steroids to floor Scott Steiner. As for Dalsim, they just have to change the whole character completely. He's the most passive in the whole movie, barely throwing a single punch. Poor Dalsim, always underappreciated. One of the oddest parts of the movie is that in his final scene, he's inexplicably bald despite having a full head of hair at all other times, with no explanation. Why? Is the collapse of the building you're working in the right time to get a buzz cut, even if you know you're going to be sticking around? Where did he even find the clippers? Now there is a reason in that he apparently gets covered with toxic waste at some point, but confusing editing obfuscates it. More on that later too. You would be forgiven for thinking that the whole movie is the Guile and Bison show and that everyone else is meaningless, but some of the other characters do shine, and before we get to the inevitable Raul Julia loving, I would like to highlight that. I've already done Weir and Ken, but Ming-Na Wen makes a really good Chun-Li and gives one of the best performances in the movie despite having precious little to work with. Her and Cammy are basically the only female characters in the whole movie, and she's the only one who gets much in the way of meaningful screen time. While he's not a Street Fighter character, I did enjoy uber Shakespearean actor Simon Callow's one scene, basically a cameo, as the snooty and totally cowardly AN ambassador. It's not exactly a stretch for him, but a fun little part. Oh, by the way, this part of the movie is the whole reason why the AN is called the AN, and not the UN, which they obviously are. The real United Nations threatened to sue the whole production into oblivion because of this scene in the script.
Colonel Guile, these instructions... Stop them, please.
Hey, I would love to, but some moron just scanned me.
Anyway, I also quite liked Wes Studi's performance as Sagat. The one-eyed tiger is one of my favourite SF characters, and I thought that Wes was suitably sinister and did him a lot of justice. But of the supporting cast, one absolutely sticks out for me. Andrew Bryniarski, playing Zangief. Zangief is the ultimate in dumb muscle. Bryniarski is perfect for the role and embodies the character, and of course he has the brilliant super heavyweight fight with E. Honda, but he also gets at least two of the funniest lines in the movie. Here they are.
Quick! Change the channel! If you know this, then why do you serve him?
Because he paid me a freaking fortune, you moron.
You got paid?
Like, those lines are legitimately hilarious and delivered perfectly. Zangief, you see, is so dim that he actually believes that he's fighting for the good guys for near enough the whole movie. Everyone loves Julia, of course, but spare a little love for Bryniarski as Zangief, because he's actually great, and it's kind of unfortunate that I don't think I've really seen him in anything else aside from this movie. He did play Leatherface in the Texas Chainsaw Massacre reboots from a few years back, but not all that much else. But of course, in the end, you just have to stand in awe of a truly brilliant actor. It mattered not a jot that Raul Julia could be seen as way too good for this movie. He certainly didn't think that he was too good for this movie. In the end, he loved taking on the role of Bison, partly because he got the best possible preparation for the role. He was basically taught it by his kids. It doesn't matter how cheesy the line is, Julia makes it work with inch-perfect gravitas.
For you, the day Bison graced your village was the most important day of your life. But for me, it was Tuesday.
He may not have the appropriate muscle for an action blockbuster, his appearance noticeably more gaunt after his recent struggles with illness, but he more than makes up for it with sheer presence. Whenever Bison is on the screen, Julia dominates utterly.
Something wrong, Colonel? You come here prepared to fight a madman, and instead you found a god?
A lot of his lines are justly famous and still fantastic to this day, and I could wax lyrical about his performance for at least another hour. It's often said, but this movie is worth watching in full purely for Raul Julia as Bison alone. Hell, I would go further and say that pretty much because of Raul Julia, there's absolutely no way that this film can be considered a terrible movie. There are other reasons why I enjoy this movie despite all of its faults, but Julia is obviously the main one. Just, what an actor. It's a villainous masterclass. And yes, it's in direct contrast to Jean-Claude Van Damme as Guile, who is, alas, quite terrible. This may be JCVD in his most popular period, but popularity breeds complacency, and by this time Jean-Claude was very goddamn complacent indeed. He barely plays Guile as anything more than bog-standard Jean-Claude Van Damme. Only in a couple of moments when he has to give a speech or something, does he look like he'd actually rather be there instead of, I don't know, Planet Hollywood probably.
But we can all go home. Well, I'm not going home.
It's his interaction with others that just always feels so stilted, no matter how hard the other person seems to be trying. And while there is a sort of weird presence there, it's just him. It's not really the character he's playing, it's just Van Damme. He's good in anything action related, but when dialogue starts, yeah, it can be painful.
Come out from behind the curtain, wizard. Let's see how pure your combat really is.
And obviously it doesn't help that he went to the Sean Connery School of Movie Accents, meaning that he never bothered to ever do one.
Are you men enough to fight with me?
Anyone who opposes me will be destroyed.
Colonel, you can't!
Well, there's no need for that!
Only his interactions with Bison bring his levels up to anything higher than a quarrel, and there's precious few of those until the end. Reports from the set do reflect this in a lot of ways. A fair few of the actors actually had a fairly fun time filming Street Fighter, and that despite everything, it felt like a fairly relaxed production for a lot of that period. Raul Julia was a consummate professional in every way. Although he was often a little down between takes, understandably, he'd be on the second that cameras started rolling, and he would do anything. He very rarely actually even required the use of a stunt double for the movie. And Jean-Claude? An aloof pain in the arse who never showed up on time and interfered with the production whenever he could. Speaking of production, Low's fights. Street Fighter is kind of a marvel of post-production and pickups due to just how much shit went wrong through the course of the production. Capcom's meddling now became constant monitoring to make sure the film stayed on brand, and they were horrified to learn, late in production, that the big fights weren't using all that many special moves from the game. This kind of explains why whenever you actually see a special move in one of the fights, it just looks so awkward and out of place. Ryu actually does a Hadouken at one point, sort of. I mean, you would barely notice because it was added so late that there wasn't enough time to do proper SFX for it. A lot of the special moves are just barely identifiable and honestly pointless. The fights would have looked better without them, and they result in the editing being very odd, with fights often occurring in tiny little segments cross-cut with each other just so that the whole Frankenstein's monster that is this movie can make any sense. One problem that fans of the movie do have that is truly a problem with the movie is that, well, the fights are hardly centre stage most of the time, and they sort of should be, even if it isn't a tournament or whatever. The film is called Street Fighter, after all. The editing on fights is confusing to the point where you can never quite remember if there's supposed to be a fight going on somewhere or not. And so the only fight that truly ends up working is the final one between Guile and Bison. As the only fight truly central to the plot, it gets as much screen time as almost every other fight in the film combined, and rightly so. And hey, Bison's fake death and revival through levitation, lightning and psycho crushers is bloody awesome.
For I beheld Satan as he fell from heaven like lightning!
Other marvels of post-production include dealing with the nightmare that was the production's trip to Bangkok, which ended up being a massive waste of money due to bugs immediately savaging the cast and crew, anyone who didn't go on an immediate binge anyways, and a soundstage that was almost totally unusable due to previously unseen holes in the walls. Shooting took place in Bangkok, the Gold Coast and Vancouver, making for an exciting guessing game where you try to figure out what country the production's filming in from one shot to the next. And then there was the case of Raul Julia himself. He actually looked a lot more sick than this at the start of the production, as in close to death. The crew hadn't realised just how grave the situation was. Street Fighter was actually shot because of this back to front. The action shots, including all the fights, were shot first, with Julia's condition less noticeable in long shots and quick cuts. This allowed time for Julia to relax with his family and basically build up a little tone, fatten up a bit, which he did, meaning that the dialogue and drama, including the close-ups of Bison and so forth, could then be shot after all the action, which is the one way round. So much work for just another action movie. The final big marvel came in the edit. The first finished cut of the film, sweeping in on the back of more worrying over game violence, was rated R. Too high, not what Capcom or frankly anyone wanted. A lot of the blood was removed and some scenes were cut very hard. You would never know, for example, watching the film, that Vega actually dies at the end of his final fight with Ryu by being impaled on his claw, which is why he doesn't appear in the ending with DJ and Sagat. The second cut, with a lot of violence taken out, was rated a G. Too low. And so this one little line was added to the film in post.
4 years of ROTC for this shit.
Tame enough? Yeah, but enough for the film to finally get the PG-13 rating everyone desired, meaning that somehow, someway, it's managed to make it to the cinemas on the desired release date of December 23rd, 1994. Yes, that's the difference between G and PG-13 in a nutshell, pretty much. Reviews were, well, very poor by and large, and the film dropped off massively in its second week of box office, but made money worldwide.
It stinks.
I can understand why a lot of people wouldn't like this movie. A lot of the reasons are very valid. Editing wise, it's kind of a mess. A lot of scenes seem to be a bit out of order, occurring at confusing points in the timeline, which you can easily identify due to the 72-hour countdown that runs through the whole thing. For example, after capturing the team of journalists, Bison has Chun-Li escorted to his own private chambers. However, going by the clock, it feels like it's about 8 or so hours before Bison finally goes to said chambers and talks about Tuesday. This is endemic of what the film's like on the whole. There's just so much crap to fit in at all times. The one thing you couldn't say about it is that it's ever boring. With so many characters and so little time, there is never any point where just, well, nothing happens. The whole movie feels like a bunch of crap thrown at the wall at all times, but a decent amount of it sticks, enough to make it a fun ride in my view. And of course, there's Raul Julia. And then you've got the purists' complaints, that it's too much of an action movie with too much shooting and not enough fighting, that a lot of the characters are nothing like their video game counterparts and so forth, and some of these are pretty valid too, although a straight adaptation of the video game would have hardly worked. I mean, let's not forget that Street Fighter 2 the game has way less plot than this movie. Way less plot than almost any movie in fact. It's literally, Bison holds a tournament and leaves people there. You gotta do something a bit different with that to work with if you want to make a movie. Street Fighter is a wacky movie, to be sure. I think a reason that I do like it so much is because there's a lot of potential in the movie. There's no question that if the production had been smoother, and perhaps if it hadn't been meddled with so much, that it could have been a really strong action movie. There's moments of very good craft in the film, where it totally defies a rather low budget and looks like a very high quality movie indeed. Was Stephen E. Souza the right choice as director? Sort of yes and no. He clashed quite a lot with the crew at points and according to some didn't seem to have a lot of control over the picture. But it was chaos. And in the end I think a lot of people pulled together to make something close to being decent. This in the end is very much an ensemble piece, both in front of and behind the camera. The best way to think of Street Fighter is as an enjoyable if highly flawed movie that should have set up an excellent sequel. A sequel that would apparently have focused more on a smaller group of characters, with maybe a lot more on Ryu and Ken this time round, along with the reveal that Dalsim wasn't actually dead and would have become the stretchy kin of pain we know and love him as, and of course, Bison would be back as the villain. The sequel was planned right from the post-credits stinner, where a fist pokes out from the rubble, and a computer program plays with the not dead Bison selecting World Domination? Replay. But of course, it was not to be. On October the 16th, 1994, Raul Julia was taken to North Shore University Hospital with intense abdominal pains, and would suffer a stroke that same night. 8 days later he passed away due to complications from the stroke. The acting world mourned, and his body returned to Puerto Rico, where he would be interred in San Juan on October the 27th, following a state funeral. Only Raul truly knew how sick he was, it seemed. Legend has it that he had allowed his kids to pick Street Fighter as the next movie he'd do, thinking that it would be his final movie. A nice thought, although probably apocryphal, as he probably didn't think it would be his final work. At the time of his death, he was reportedly reviewing a part in Desperado, the sequel to Robert Rodriguez's groundbreaking El Mariachi. What is true is that he did take the role of Bison on the recommendation of his kids. He let them help him to prepare for the role, and his family were on the shoot with him almost all of the time. In any case, Raul Julia was gone, and with him went any thought of a sequel to Street Fighter. As good as he was the one thing about the whole production that would have been truly irreplaceable. It couldn't have happened without Julia as Bison, and a sequel would have been unquestionable if he wasn't involved. Of course, Julia died before Street Fighter was released into the cinema, therefore the post-credits stinger did not appear in the theatrical release, but was added into the home video version. And all of the version's credits feature the simple, heartfelt dedication at the start of them. For Raul, vaya con Dios, meaning go with God. Street Fighter represented the high watermark for a lot of other people involved, including the main players. Steven E. Souza stopped being all that successful after Street Fighter and wouldn't step behind the camera all that much afterwards, although he did play a part in another video game movie, writing the script for Lara Croft Tomb Raider: The Cradle of Life. Jean-Claude Van Damme, after capping off a pretty good 1994 with Street Fighter, found his box office star gradually waning soon after, hitting nothing but a succession of diminishing return unimpressive action movies. This wasn't limited to him either, as almost every action star of the 80s started struggling at around the same time. After a few years in direct-to-video limbo though, came Resurrection with the self-referential and brilliant JCVD in 2008, in which a faded action star gets caught up in a bank robbery. At one point in the film, Jean-Claude stops everything and delivers a spellbinding, heartfelt, almost totally improvised 6-minute monologue that pretty much goes through his whole career, including the shitty, cocaine-infused phase he was in when Street Fighter and the likes of such were made. This part seems appropriate.
Van Damme, la bête, le tigre de la cage, l'homme Bloodsport, est tombé dedans. J'étais déchiré, mentalement, physiquement, à un point que je m'en suis sorti.
And so, we're done with Street Fighter. Maybe this is something that could catch on. Maybe there could be more video game movies in the future. Who knows? They probably won't be as fun as this one though, lacking as they are in Raul Julia. Hopefully though you've enjoyed the video, and I'm going to leave you with just one of many classic moments. Tuesday is the one that gets all the credit, but this is my favourite. Bye for now.
Until the very planet is in the loving grip of the Pax Bisonica. And then peace will reign in the world. And all humanity shall bow to me in humble gratitude.
destroyed.